Bounty hunting is a complicated profession. Don't you agree?
The Cynic Radio Podcast.
Hi, I'm Chad L. Coleman, Tyrese from The Walking Dead, and Cuddy from The Wire, and you are listening to the Cynic Radio Podcast. Here are your hosts, Cynic.
Hey, the facts are Spider-Man belongs in the MCU. Sony was delusional thinking they didn't need Marvel, and now he's back. And we, the fans, are 100% proudly responsible for that.
Agree?
As long as DC wants to make dark and gritty movies, they're going to lag behind Marvel in every category.
And Ryan.
Batman vs. Superman is objectively better than Infinity War.
This is the greatest show of all time.
And this is episode 179 of the Cynic Radio Podcast. And I'm your co-host, Cynic. And joining me, as always, my tag team partners, Igri and Ryan. And on this week's show, we jump back in time to talk about one of my favorite shows, I'd say, in forever, as we break down season 1 of Ted Lasso. We got a lot of ground to cover, so let's get to it. How you guys been? What have you been up to?
I've been up to not much. Work for one like the last few weeks have been pretty quiet on this front.
How about you, IG?
A little bit of gaming. I've been playing some Jedi Survivor, streamed a couple of times on Twitch. Had some fun there, but I'm playing on kind of story difficulty because I've watched some people playing on like Jedi Master difficulty and like beating their head against a wall. So far I've avoided that. I just want to see the story. I've still got a couple more streams in me to get through the story, but yeah, that's what I've been doing. And seems like you've been out having fun for a change. Instead of us on vacation, you went on vacation.
It's shocking that Ryan says he's done nothing, and I've been busy the last week. Yeah, I went out and saw a few more baseball teams, a couple more stadiums under my belt. I'm down to needing 7 now, which is nice. And it was nice to get away for a little while. Sometimes the Northeast can be a bit rigid, and it's nice to, go south and meet some fine folks and see the rest of the country. Had some great food, saw a concert. It was a good time. I'm glad I got it done. And I'm really ready to talk about this Ted Lasso season 1 with you, Ryan, and answer your questions. But first, I want to say there's no possible way that I ever thought I was as bad at fantasy baseball as I am podcasting. But my team, the Undraftables, has now lost its last 5 games. So I am currently sitting at 2-5, which I'm not feeling great about myself about. I get a little emotional when I think about it because I didn't think it was possible for me to be worse at podcasting or at this than I am podcasting, but I'm pulling it off week by week. So I'm hoping to just lose out, and maybe I'll get the first draft next year. So that's what's been going on with me. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Ryan, and let's talk about Ted Lasso.
All right, yeah. It feels like so long ago that season 1 of Ted Lasso came out. But I guess it was a really interesting show that came out at a very interesting time. So, Cynic, I'll start off with you. But this question will be for both of you guys. What were your initial expectations going into the show? Like, did you hear about it from friends? Did you go into it like, oh, I want to watch it? It's based on a funny commercial, or Jason Sudeikis is like, what was your entryway into it? And what, if any, expectations do you have going into it?
Oddly enough, I became aware of Ted Lasso from the very beginning, but I didn't start watching it till I'd say after the first season, mostly because of the picture behind us. Now, I work in New York City, and we sometimes go outside, get a little bit of air, sit around and drink coffee before we start our shift. And that very picture convinced me not to watch the show. It the building next to my job has nothing but Apple TV promos on it. And it annoyed me to the point where I'm like, I'm never going to watch this until I started hearing more and more about it. And I got into it. And I got to say that I can't love the show more than I do right now.
Ig, how about you?
Well, what really finally convinced me is Joe's endless nagging on me about you got to go watch Ted Lasso. But, honestly, I was probably going to watch it anyway because I think Jason Sudeikis is absolutely hilarious, right? He's done so many things. Like I love him in like Horrible Bosses and We're the Millers, and he's got a certain amount of charisma and just I like the way he acts. So it would have gotten me there anyway. And I remember seeing some of the promos. I think they were like 2014. He was like doing things as Ted Lasso with the glorious mustache and everything. And so I was probably going to watch it anyway, just because of Jason Sudeikis. Like I don't recognize many of the other actors before watching any of this. So like he would be the only person that I knew. Not that everybody else hasn't done a great job, but I didn't know them before watching this.
So Ted Lasso as a character, as you alluded to, started as in a series of successful commercials. So I guess, Cynic, first, were you aware of the commercials? And then how successful do you think the transition was from commercials to full-fledged TV show? Because it's not often that it works. We get that with like SNL, where you get these, SNL skits that might be funny as a skit, but then when you make it into a full-on show or feature, it falls flat. So how do you think this transition was from commercial to TV show, and that they were able to milk, a dumb concept for something that actually works?
Yeah, I believe it might have been some skits on Funny or Die too, right?
Yeah.
Am I wrong there? I'm not quite sure, but
Sure.
I hadn't become aware till I started watching the show, and then I went back and watched some of it. I'm not the biggest fan of Saturday Night Live, especially I'd say within the last 10, 15 years. I think the show has grown stale. So it is a big surprise to me that a show was able to, or a character from a commercial was able to transition into such a wonderfully written show.
Yeah. Any thoughts on your end, Ig?
Well, it's one of those things, like the last thing that I can remember that was like basically a commercial, because that's what he was doing. He was doing promos for NBC Sports, right? As Ted Lasso when they were doing soccer games, right? Because NBC Sports showing soccer games to Americans normally kind of goes over like a lead balloon. Well, they started bringing in some audience by putting Ted Lasso there, right? An American guy kind of trying to coach soccer that doesn't really know anything about it. So it kind of worked well, but the only time I remember a commercial turning into something much bigger was the Ernest movies, right? Like it's way back when then you got like 12 Ernest movies, like Ernest Goes to Jail, Ernest Goes Camping, like all that crazy nonsense. What do you mean, Vern? And all that nonsense. So it's not a real big thing that happens very often. Like, yeah, the skits from SNL, the recurring skits that become into things like Wayne's World and all that stuff. Yeah, those happen. But normally a commercial thing doesn't translate to anything of this scale. Sometimes you might get one or two bigger things, but not a whole lot.
Thank you, Tom. Much appreciated.
So, one of the key themes in the show is like the power of positivity, and you're kind of beat over the head with that, I think, pretty early on. Cynic, how effective do you think Ted's kind of unrelenting optimism is, throughout the season?
I mean, at first, I think it's needed, but then over time, it kind of got a little creepy. There's been many, many articles written about it. What would they call them? Unsincere psychopath. Or insincere psychopath. Yeah, I think that's what they might have referred to him as. I mean, I can't imagine working with or being coached by someone like Ted Lasso. It probably wouldn't fit my personal style of conduct, but I mean, it worked on the show. I mean, it got us tuning in. It did get a couple laughs from me. So, I mean, there's that.
Yeah. So one of my favorite things about the show is just the diverse cast of characters. Like, it has actually a really great cast, diverse in a number of ways, just in characterizations, in ethnicity, and there's a great variety of characters on the show, which you get in sports shows and sports movies, which is in ways that maybe you don't get in others. Ig, who's your favorite character and why?
Funny enough, it's not one of the athletes, right? And it's probably a tie between two. I really like Nathan, right? Played by Nick Muhammad, the little, he's basically a clubby, right? He works in the clubhouse, like gets everything together for everybody, like runs errands for the coach. And he's real like meek and timid and everything in season 1, and he just gets like chewed up by everybody. And then Coach Beard, just cause he's like so nonchalant about everything, and he's like, "That's not how it works. Everything's fine," and he's just very monotone. And like, and it's hard to pick, honestly, because there's so many good performances. Like, everybody's doing a bang up job in this, but like, they stuck out to me for some reason. Coach Beard and Nathan.
Cynic, how about you?
Oh, easily, it's Roy Kent. Easily, everything about Roy Kent encompasses who I am. If there was ever a character that's my spirit animal, it would definitely be Roy Kent. I mean, Brett Goldstein has acted his ass off in that part. It's as if it was written for him, and he just steals every single scene that he's a part of. How about you, Ryan?
I think you guys both you stole mine. I think I think Roy Kent as a character is the most fun and interesting character. But I think I would say Roy Kent is the most fun. You just love watching him on screen and his reactions to stuff. I think Nate actually is the most interesting character because there's a lot going on in internally for him and also externally in how the world kind of treats him. And I like that dynamic between he and Ted. And, I think it works. And I think it's something that's interesting that gets explored later on. I'm not sure how well it's handled later on. But I would say, between Roy Kent and Nate, you guys both kind of hit the nail on the head for me. But another interesting character that I wanted to get to actually is Rebecca Wilson, who's the owner of the team. So what's interesting here is the show starts off and like Major League, right? Owner of the team who wants to tank, because of a personal agenda. How did your perception of her evolve throughout, and what do you think of her character? And did it surprise you when she made the changes that she makes at the end?
I thought, initially, like I initially got that exact same vibe, right? Major League. She's trying to tank this. She basically got it in a divorce from her husband. She's like, and she knows her husband loves it, so she just wants to destroy it, just like watch it crumble to nothing. And so I'm gonna hire this American that doesn't know anything about what's going on, and we're just gonna watch it just burn to death and die. But then, like, the eternal optimism of Ted Lasso and just the way that he like, how can you not love the guy, right? He just comes in every day with his little box of cookies and like says nice things every day, and like he's just a lovable guy. Like, whether he knows what he's doing or not, he's going to find a way to get results, and that's great, right? And so the fact that they didn't Major League it all the way, like she kind of saw that he was getting some results, and not necessarily to despite her like Major League did, where like they were like, the owner's an asshole, so we're going to win despite them. It was more like, okay, I see that you guys actually want to do this, and I'm having fun, and I really like how Ted treats me, so I'm going to like start supporting the team a little more. I liked that she wasn't a heel all the way through. Like, she was a little bit cold and distant at the beginning, but she was never really a true heel. Yeah. So I think she put on an amazing performance and really knocked it out of the park, because I could see somebody being very cold and distant and trying to destroy something just because like she's been wronged, like hell hath no fury like a woman scorned, right? So why wouldn't she want to do this to the team? But she's really just knocked it out, like understanding that she can take ownership of something like this and love it at the same time.
Yeah, Hannah Waddingham has really killed that part. She's done a great job. Now, dating myself, I believe there was one of the first HBO shows called First and 10 that had a very similar plot. Same thing. I think the owner ended up switching midway through, but I like the way they did this. I like how he kind of, I don't want to say wore her down because that sounds disingenuous, but I think she warmed up to him, and she realized he, through his kindness, was able to point out to her what she was doing and how she was doing it, even though he was unaware of it. And it's hard not to like the guy. It's hard not, like Trent Grimm said, it's hard not to root for Ted Lasso. So, yeah, I like the way they did that. I was worried at first that, this is going to be an ongoing theme the whole show, coach versus management. And I really didn't want that. And it ended up being something different. And I was happy about that.
Yeah, I think the show does a great job, especially in season 1, of subverting expectations throughout. In good, for good and bad story wise. You have you have this guy in Ted Lasso who easily could have been the butt of the joke, right? The whole show could have been about this dumb American, soccer coach who just doesn't get it, and it's not. And same thing with her. Like, she could have been the villain and the woman scorned and the antagonist throughout, and she's not. And I think the show does a really good job. I know that it's been a big deal about how it handles mental health, and I do think that it really takes the psyche of each character, and they're all dealing with something. They're dealing with trauma. They're dealing with stress from their lives, and so you watch them as they make poor decisions sometimes, and then they come around and make good decisions. And I think it's a thread that we see throughout the show, that it really is dealing with people who feel like they have layers. They feel like real people, because we are all capable of making bad choices at times, and then changing our minds. And I think the show does a good job of allowing things to happen like that. So in addition to a great cast of characters, I think another great thing about the show is it does a really good job of pairing characters together. There are tons of great pairings. So, Cynic, I'll start with you. What's your favorite pairing in the show?
That's kind of an interesting question. I guess, and I'm going to go outside the box here. My favorite pairing in the show is probably Roy and Jamie.
Even early on, even season one?
Yes, just even with the conflict between the two, because they were so the polar opposites, rubbing each other raw. But Roy also later in the season reveals that I used to be Jamie, so I understand where he's coming from, but he still can't find it within himself to tolerate the guy. Mm-hmm. So them pairing off, and it pays off much later, but them as a pair has worked really well. Relationship wise, probably in the first season, all we ever got to see was Jamie and Killy and Roy and Killy. And
relationship, I just meant connect two characters.
Oh yeah. Then definitely Jamie and Roy. I enjoy the chemistry between the two, even though it was mostly antagonistic.
Yeah. How about you, Vic?
Well, mine is either going to be, Ted and Coach Beard, or it's going to be Rebecca and Leslie. Just the way Leslie's trying to get things to keep the team alive. Rebecca's trying to kill it, and he's just trying to kind of just weasel things past every once in a while. And he's kind of that like mousy assistant that gets results somehow. I like that dichotomy, but then just all the times that Ted Lasso and Coach Beard are just sitting together talking about things, and like one of the scenes that they show for trailers and stuff is him talking about like, is that offsides? Is like, yeah, I don't think that's not how that works, and Coach Beard is just like, he understands the sport, but he's another American that he probably read, the Dummy's Guide to Soccer, and like has that much understanding more than Ted Lasso. Yeah. But just Coach Beard he's a good Abbott to Lasso's Costello. Yeah. It works out very well.
Yeah. No, there are tons of great ones. I'm going to say a little, not outside the box, a little outside the box is Nate and Ted, which, maybe we don't get as much time. There's not as much banter between them, but I think, the show builds towards this kind of showdown between them. And I think early on, Nate's just kind of this schlubby kit man who, is kind of nervous and awkward, and kind of parts of their relationship work well. And they plant seeds of where I think Ted's not quite, he's not being, I'm not even getting the words, but he hasn't considered Nate as much as Nate would like to be considered. And that Nate's fragile ego is harmed by it. And I think they do a great job of planting those seeds for later seasons. And we're still a couple episodes away, where I won't give things away, but some odd things have happened. But I really like how they built that adversarial relationship between them early on, because it just wasn't something that you would have expected, and it was another way that the show kind of subverts expectations. So speaking of Nate, he's the kit man, and he experiences a major transformation throughout this season. So Ig, what were your thoughts on his character, and were you surprised by the direction that his own story took?
I wasn't necessarily surprised by it, but I love the character. It's one of those things where, he's basically the butt of the team's jokes, right? They mess with him all the time, and they make his life difficult and everything. And Ted just doesn't do that to him. Ted treats him like he's a human being, like he belongs there, like he's a part of the team and he's important. And it leads to some really good moments. And, Nate finally learning to stand up for himself some. So I really think that having some of those things and showing, because quite often, at least, elite level sports people, some of them have been shown to be very selfish and very inward driven. And when you get a coach like Ted, who isn't going to allow that to fly all that often, that's when people come back down to earth and start treating people with respect. And like, I just watched a video on like the Boston Red Sox bat boy, like 2 days ago. And like the team treats that guy like he's a member of the team, right? And basically he goes around and he puts helmets where they go and makes sure that they have their bats lined up and brings balls out to the umpire. And like, he's got an important part, but like, he's not an athlete in any way, but they treat him right, which means I'm thinking that same kind of thing. The managers and the coaches and everything like aren't going to let these diva, like $10 million a year ball players treat people that are there doing a good job like shit. So it's one of those things that like Ted Lasso again shows that like we're not going to treat people who need to be treated fairly like they're nothing, because nobody here is nothing. So I like that they included that, because they could have stayed and focused on just the team and Ted and not had something like that in that. But that's not real. That it gave a lot more depth to this show to include those things. And that's what part of the thing that makes it that much better.
Yeah. So, Cynic, we've all seen many sports shows, and sports movies. So I guess first, did the sports aspect of it work? Were the matches engaging and as exciting as other things we've seen? And where does it rank among your favorite sports IP, I guess?
Well, that's the thing, is that, and I was just thinking about that before you asked the question, how little football has to do with the show, like how little they show of it. It's almost like there's barely enough substance in there where they can call it meat. There's barely enough soccer in there to call it a sports show. They give you just enough, and it's hidden well in the background. And I have a feeling that because football's not so big in America, that may stop people from wanting to watch the show, but it really has very little to nothing to do about it. It could be checkers, it could be Uno, it could be, it wouldn't change the premise of the show, because it's about relationships, it's about characters, it's about self-growth, it's about mental health. I mean, the show is so multifaceted and with such great relationships that I think it's almost unfair to call it a sports show.
How about you, Ig?
I think he's got it right on the head. Like, they don't spend a lot of time showing anybody running around a pitch in a game, right? There's a couple of practice shots in a lot of the episodes where they're talking about things that are happening while they're getting ready for games. But the actual competition stuff, like you get minutes basically in the whole season. I think it's probably less than 20 minutes in the whole season where they're actually playing games. And the only time they spend any time at it is really kind of out at the last episode when they're playing whatever game to, I think, get promoted. Yeah. So it's one of those things as far as ranking it in other sports shows. Like if we're ranking it to things that actually have the sports in it, like Bull Durham, where they're actually like playing baseball probably half of the time, you really can't compare it. It's apples and oranges. Like it is a sports show based around a sports team, but like Joe was bringing up First and 10 previously, and that was kind of the same thing. Very little actual football played in the thing. It was more the comedy drama thing that this is, and that's fine. Doesn't mean that I don't associate it with a sports show, but like I don't need it to like be that good at sports, because then you need to hire like a whole other crew of people to be actual athletes so that you don't injure Brett Goldstein out trying to actually play soccer and he, tears an ACL and can't work for 6 months. That would be terrible.
Yeah. All right, so I'll give this to both of you guys. Sidney can be first for this one. The biscuits in Ted Lasso have become iconic. So if you were to create your own signature snack to win over a group of colleagues, what would it be and why?
Oh, probably caramel brownies. Because if they didn't want them, I would just take them home and eat them myself. I'm absolutely addicted to anything brownies, homemade cookies, any of that stuff. But probably caramel brownies. Yeah, I had brought some in for a Christmas party or something, and people absolutely loved them. So, yeah, that would be my signature move.
Hey, how about you?
Yeah, him and his caramel brownies and cookies and stuff. Like every time we walked by something, and when he came out to visit me, that there was a cookie available, he's like, "I'm gonna go buy some cookies." I don't know. I'm more of a meal kind of thing. Like I make a pretty good chili, and I like to bring, like, when I decide I'm going to do that. I when I was going to work, I would make 2 batches of it. I would make one for the family at home and one to bring to work for people to just have some, right? And it was always appreciated. People would always get excited. It's like, "Oh, you brought chili? I'll be back. I'm going to go drop this off, and I'm coming right back to have some." And I would have to make sure it was a pretty good sized batch, because like a ton of people would be coming to try and get some. And some people, can I have seconds? I'm like, half the people haven't had any yet. No, you can't have seconds. So like, it's worked out for me. And you know, the sweets is always a good option. Maybe Rice Krispie bars. Most people like those too.
Yeah. It's funny though. I was noticing. Does every episode have her eating the biscuits that he's gotten her? Because I feel like this season,
just about every episode,
she's
maybe
eating.
not the one where they go to Amsterdam.
Okay,
Yeah. I think that the whole
It seems
episode
like
was
every
away.
episode she's eating the biscuits. Pretty solid job of them to keep up on that. All right, so this was
apparently I read something that those biscuits were actually terrible because they didn't think she was going to eat them all the time. So they didn't pay any attention to making sure that they gave her something like especially edible. They just had to look a certain way.
Yeah.
And she ate them anyway. And like, apparently they were terrible. I read that fact somewhere getting ready for the show tonight.
Yeah. So another one. This one's a little bit harder. You're going to start off with this one. So the other highlight of the show is his speeches. The inspirational speeches. So if you were to deliver a motivational speech to your sports team, what sports metaphor or analogy would you use?
It's the bottom of the 9th and we're down by 2 touchdowns. All we need is a hat trick and we can get this done.
Actually good and appropriate for the show, I guess. How about you, Cynic?
I would still rate from Waterboy. It's the last game of the season and you can't hold anything back. But you've been saying that all season long.
All right. So, Ig, your MVP for the season, final thoughts, and your rating for season 1.
My MVP for the season, still, it's got to be Ted, right? You know, I mean, it was an unexpected thing and he became successful and he won everybody over and he got the team to perform by just being Ted. It was just really well done. I guess my favorite part of the season is watching him break down when he's basically got to sign his divorce papers, because like anybody that's been through a bad breakup knows how devastating that is. And the fact that he was able to, keep it together enough going through all that, knowing, because we didn't know that was all happening that way early, and like getting to that point where that's what he's dealing with while he's trying to be upbeat and team motivating and keeping everybody together. I think that shows, what a lot of us have gone through, where we have to show up every day and do a thing that at times we don't want to do. We don't want to get out of bed, and we still have to get up and function and show everybody what's going on. And it takes an impressive amount of strength. So, and the fact that they, the mental health aspect of this and seeing how that's working and that they paid attention to it made this a lot more real. And it's one of the reasons that I enjoyed it so much. Great show, great cast, a lot of fun things. I mean, I guess one of my other favorite moments is when Jamie decides he's not going to practice. And so coach puts Danny in, and Danny is just like the most excited kid that speaks 3 words of English at all. And he's just happy to be there. And he goes out and he shows out, and he's a great player. Jamie learns, like, you don't get to act like that, like not here. Maybe if you go somewhere else, but not on Ted's team. You're not going to be that guy. So many great moments in this and so many fun things that happened here. And, I'm glad that I got talked into watching it. And
You're welcome.
I'm going to give season 1 a 9. I really enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun to watch. And I'm not up on season 3 yet because I get to the point where when they're releasing them one by one, I get too anxious waiting for the next one. So I let them build up so that I can watch like a crazy person.
All right, I'll give mine and then I'll swing it over to you, Cynic. So it's interesting, actually. I had a really hard time coming up with an MVP. I think obviously Ted Lasso is the obvious choice, but it really is an ensemble. Like there really is a great ensemble, and it does what all great sports movies or shows do, which is to give you just an amazing cast of eclectic characters. So it's kind of hard to really decide. I would go with probably Hannah Waddingham, Rebecca, just in that she was supposed to be the villain, and I think it's her character that makes the show work. That she connects with everybody. She has a major character arc herself throughout the season and throughout the show in general. So I would say if it's not Ted, it's probably her. But it really is an ensemble, and it's really difficult to come up with like who's the best or the MVP for the show. But it's a great show, and I think it came at the perfect time. I think when everybody was just down at the middle of COVID, we're not sure what's going on. When people, things will get back to normal. Kind of everyone's depressed and tired and alone, and you have this show that's just could have been a completely different show. It could have been a cynical show. It could have been, a show where the joke was on him, and it wasn't. It's just really positive and honest and deals with real topics. So it's not just, a joke a minute romp, but it actually deals with honest, real topics. It deals with mental health. The characters feel real. They feel developed. It's really funny, but also thought provoking. So I think it was just the perfect, show at the right place at the right time, that was just a shock to everybody. Because I don't think anybody expected a show like this, and especially with the way it was advertised, it just was unexpected. So yeah, I'm right there with Ig. I'm probably give it a little bit higher, 9.25, but awesome show, and it really has kept it up for the most part for the last couple seasons.
Yeah, the third season's getting bombed by critics and people and maybe these were people that should have never took to the show to begin with. I don't quite understand what the problem is, but as far as the first season goes, it's as close to perfect as it could possibly be. I remember when I first watched the first episode, and I ended up, I think, watching 3 or 4 in one sitting because I liked it so much. And then when I ended up in my my current relationship, we sat down and rewatched it again, and she absolutely fell in love with it. The show could have been a lot different because I believe Coach Lasso was a lot more of a volatile, like mean, screaming type character. And Jason Sudeikis sat down and looked at the world and said, due to the political climate, they were going to shoot for something more positive. So yeah, I think we probably would have got 1 season of that original show and nobody would have tuned in and Apple would have moved forward. But Apple is doing a bang up job. I don't know if you guys have seen anything else on there, but there's a show called Shrinking with Harrison Ford and Jason Segel that's fucking amazing. Like we're 5 or 6 episodes into it now, and I can't stop watching that show. Just really well written characters, complex emotionally. It just stuff that I want to see. So I'm gonna move on to some of their other shows when I'm done with that. But a good show, a good job by Apple. I mean, they're blowing themselves up in the commercial, like everybody's on here, but it's getting to the point where you can't ignore. For someone who canceled their Netflix subscription after 5-10 years of having it, I'm right there on board with Apple, and I can't wait to see what they do next. I'm kind of sad that the show is that Ted Lasso is ending after 3 seasons because I really want more, but I think they're going to go out on the right note. My MVP for the show is Roy Kent. I mean, hands down, I love every single twist and turn that this character is taken, from the disconnected athlete to the put off pundit to the finding his way through personal relationships and just navigating life. He became the most important character in the show to me. I mean, he moves through the world like I do, or like I wish I could at times. And I enjoy Brett Goldstein's portrayal very, very much of that character. Overall, I mean, listen, we all suffer through mental health issues. So some of us deal with it better than others, and Ted Lasso makes it feel okay for men to discuss these issues. They've done a great job spotlighting that. They've done a great job with Rebecca's post divorce fallout. They've done a great job with so many things, and they mix in just enough humor. And like a goldfish, I forget all about my troubles every single time I sit down and watch this show. So I'm going to go ahead and give season 1 of Ted Lasso a 10. I don't think they could have done a better job. I don't think there's been a better show in the last couple of years that I wait for every single week to come on. And it's definitely going to leave a hole in my life when it's gone, but it'll probably be rewatched numerous times. So, folks, that's about it for episode 179 of the Cynic Radio podcast. You can find us over at the socials at Cynic Radio. Questions, comments, concerns, you can find us at cynicradio@gmail.com. And until next time, IG,
don't get captured.
Follow the podcast on Twitter, Facebook, and at cynicradio.com. Available for download on iTunes.